Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. The one and only Dr. Anthony Chaffee is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first four appearances on Boundless Body Radio on episodes 261, 332, 534, and 641, all of which were some of our most popular episodes ever recorded. Dr. Anthony Chaffee is an American medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery who, over a span of 20 years, has researched the optimal nutrition habits for athletic performance and health. He is an All American rugby player and a former professional athlete in England and America. Dr. Chaffee has dedicated many years and a large part of his professional practice to the study and education of diet and nutrition, and personally practices a fully carnivorous diet to this day with amazing results. He began his university education studying molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry at the University of Washington, Seattle at the age of 15, wow, which culminated in attaining his MD from the Royal College of Surgeons. He currently resides in Perth, Australia, where he specializes in neurosurgery and does private consultations and clinics in functional medicine and nutrition. Dr. Anthony Chaffee, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
It's an honor to host you. You're somebody I consider a good friend. We've met several times in person. And like we mentioned in the introduction, you are in Perth, Australia, which means we have a significant time difference. I have to get up a little bit early, and you have to work very, very late to do these shows. So it's much easier for me to wake up early than it is for you to stay up late. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
And you've been doing a lot of travel. It sounds like you just got back from a few weeks visiting in America.
Correct. Yes, I was back in Washington visiting family.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Well, again, thanks for doing this. I know you've got a long day tomorrow, so we'll try to be concise today. I want to jump right in with a few recent concerns that people have had, even on my show. I've invited lots of different people, and I love talking to people that have a difference of opinion with me. And I don't typically push back on people when they bring up different things, although I may disagree with them. So I wanted to bring up some of these things that have been brought up recently and get your thoughts on them. My first question to you is, do you have any concerns with people doing a carnivore diet in the long term?
No, because it's just pure nutrition. You're just getting all the basic nutrients that are essential for life, and in their most bioavailable, accessible, and balanced forms, and you're excluding as many toxins and harmful anti-nutrients and chemicals that you can. So when you sort of reframe it, you don't call it just is the carnivore diet good long term, but is optimal nutrients and avoiding toxins good long term? I would say definitely yes.
Interesting. So I asked that specific question to somebody. We were doing an episode specifically on bone health, and he was mentioning all the beneficial things that come with vegetables in particular, all the nutrients that come in
Yeah,
vegetables.
oxalates, stripping calcium out of your bones,
Amazing, right?
those sorts of things. Yeah, good.
So I asked him the question, that exact same question that I asked you. Do you have any concerns with people doing a carnivore diet? I brought myself up as an example. I've been doing this for 7 years now. Do you have any concerns with people doing a carnivore diet in the long term? And his answer, it stunned me, and I didn't even know how to respond because he said, yes, it does. And then he stopped. And it was like dead silence. And I didn't even know like what to say because there was no justification for his answer. He just said, like, yes, I'm concerned. Is there anything in particular about vegetables, plant matter of any kind, in particular for bone health, in your opinion?
No, oh God, no, no. I mean, no. I think that a lot of the problems that we have with bone health and osteoporosis as we age come from eating plants and not getting enough meat because we're not making collagen properly. We're stripping out calcium out of our body. Oxalates, as I mentioned, can get into in spinach, it's in the form of oxalic acid. If anybody's ever used oxalic acid, you put a very, very small amount of this into a large amount of water, and you can strip rust off your house or a wall with this stuff, right? So that actually is in that form of oxalic acid in spinach, and when you eat this, it absorbs into your bloodstream, and that actually can bind to minerals such as calcium and strip them out, just like you strip rust off of a wall. So that is obviously a concern. I mean, there are studies going back to the 1950s that show that even though spinach has high levels of calcium, when people are fed this in clinical trials in humans, their calcium level actually decreased because the calcium was bound up in ways that we don't have the biomechanics and enzymes to break down and extract. And the oxalates that are in the spinach strip out the calcium that's in our bloodstream. So when you eat spinach, even though it has calcium in it, it actually lowers your calcium levels. Your calcium levels have to stay in a very, very, very close range in your bloodstream because if it goes too far out of balance, your heart stops. And so that's obviously something your body's going to protect you from. And so you're going to dip into your biggest reserve of calcium, which would be your bones. And I would be willing to bet that we'll figure out eventually that this is a large part of that we're eating things like oxalates and oxalic acid, but it's not the only thing. And this is stripping calcium out of our bloodstream, and so we're having to pull and leach out calcium out of our bones. Also, you don't get vitamin D3 from plants. You have to get it from either the sun or from meat and animal fat. And these are the two things that we're being told to avoid the most. Vitamin D3 is extremely important for calcium uptake in the gut, and it affects your parathyroid hormone, which affects the building, reabsorption, breakdown, and repair of your bones. And so if you get your animal nutrients out of balance, you will not be able to control your the metabolism of your bone and maintain proper bone health. So osteoporosis is extremely common. We in medical textbooks right now, it says that you can increase your bone density up to age 25, and then basically you cannot do it after that. And your body is just in decline after that. It's just entropy taking over, breaking you down. And so this is very common that we see women in particular getting osteoporosis. Now, is that, there's part of this is because their estrogen levels drop off after menopause, and estrogen is important for collagen formation, deposition, and your bones are made out of collagen. And so this is also part of our bone health as well. And so since their estrogen drops off very sharply, this can affect that as well. But it also statistically, women are more likely to eat vegetables, do what they're told, eat their leafy greens and these sorts of things. And this is likely the case that they are exposing themselves to more oxalates and other compounds in those plants that are going to be stripping out calcium. And this is very common. In my second year as a doctor, I was working in the emergency department, and I had a young woman who came in with kidney stones. And when I was speaking to the attending, discussing the case with him, he just immediately just said, "Does she eat a lot of spinach?" I was like, "I have no idea. I didn't ask." And it's like, "Yeah, always ask because spinach has a lot of oxalates, and 75% of kidney stones are oxalate stones, calcium oxalate stones. And we focus on the calcium. Ooh, don't have too much calcium, you'll get calcium oxalate stones. But it's the oxalate part of that that's important. You're supposed to have calcium in your body. You're not supposed to have a large amount of oxalates in your body. So it's the oxalates that cause a problem. And so this is well known in mainstream medicine that when you eat a lot of these plants, they cause a lot of oxalate stones, and that is stripping out calcium out of their bones as well. And it's much more common for that to be young women in particular, to get these kidney stones. So no, there's nothing I can think of that is going to be beneficial for bone. I mean, there will be things that you could use to help in bone formation, but it's going to be a poor man's version of anything that you would actually need and get from meat. There's nothing in there that you can't get from meat. There's no nutrient, full stop, that that comes in plants that you cannot get in meat at all. There's just none. And I have patients, my own patients, not just people I heard about on the internet. There's plenty of those, but my own patients who I've sent for DEXA scans and put on a carnivore diet, and they have reversed osteoporosis. Some in their 30s had early osteoporosis. Excuse me. And I've had ladies in their 60s and 70s who have gone from severe osteoporosis to normal for a 25-year-old woman within a year by going on a carnivore diet and not taking calcium supplements. That doesn't necessarily happen like that for everybody. There are multiple reasons why that might happen and why they might be suffering from osteoporosis. Some people have severe hormonal deficiencies and issues like that. I've one lady who had some very serious hormonal issues early on in her life, and so she developed osteoporosis earlier. So that's sort of a different consequence. But I've literally seen women in their 70s reverse osteoporosis with only eating meat. So if there was something that we were missing from meat, that wouldn't happen if we needed that for bone health. And the simple fact that we think in mainstream medicine that it is not possible to increase bone density generally, after the age of 25. And we're seeing people go on a carnivore diet and increase it in their 60s and 70s. And I'm sure there are examples later than that as well. That obviously shows that you're getting everything that you need from meat and then some, and you're putting your body in the particular set of circumstances that they are able to rebuild their bones and giving the right hormonal balance, vitamin nutrient balance, and so on. So if you were missing something, if there's something in plants that you just simply had to have to grow bones, that couldn't happen. So yeah, did you remember what he said that you needed from plants
Literally,
that
that's all he said. That's all he said is, yes, I'm concerned. And he stopped.
yeah,
And it just
yeah,
totally caught me off guard. And I like changed the subject because I didn't know what to
yeah,
say.
yeah? You didn't just ask him, it was like, okay, why? Or anything like
I
that?
should
Like,
have. I should have. I need
yeah.
to push back on people a little bit more than I do. But
Or
yeah,
it's not
there's
even
no
pushing back. It's
justification.
just asking for clarification. Okay, so what do you mean by that? You
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
Yeah. What exactly are your concerns? Just a
Yep.
follow-up question, and which is perfectly fair,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't have concerns over actually getting proper nutrition and avoiding toxins. No.
Well, yeah, and it's so critical to really reiterate what you're saying is that not only do you not need plants and vegetables, but they could actively be harmful for people. It's important to point
Mm-hmm.
that out.
Yeah, they can, and they are. I mean, some of it's more subtle, some of it's not all that dramatic, but they all do have toxins. Every single plant on Earth has plant defense chemicals. I mean, this is just a basic fact of nutrition of botany. That's how plants defend themselves. And if you think about it, most plants are toxic to most animals. It's just some animals have a certain ability to protect themselves against certain toxins. But if you haven't evolved against that plant and those toxins, then you will be vulnerable to them. There are about 400,000 plants in the world, and almost every single one will kill humans with even just a small intake. And of the few hundred or maybe a couple thousand that are left that won't kill us on the spot when we eat them, that doesn't mean that they're 100% benign. It just means that they're not deadly that day. But things can build up over time, and you can have low grade toxins over time that build up and cause harm. Diabetes. I mean, think about this. If you're just eating carbohydrates and seed oils and things like that, and you build up insulin resistance and your blood sugar starts to go up, you start getting damage to your body over time. Okay, so no one's suggesting that diabetes isn't harmful. No one's suggesting that hyperglycemia isn't harmful, just because it takes 30 years to start manifesting physical damage in your body. So that's what we have to remember. I mean, just be, oh, I ate a salad the other day and I'm fine. Like, yeah, okay, well, you might have smoked a cigarette the other day too. That doesn't mean that smoking is good for you or safe. And benign. So the fact of the matter is that all these plants have toxins or anti-nutrients, and that's something that we need to remember as well. I mean, I have patients that are on thyroid medication, and if they have a cup of coffee within 2 hours of taking their thyroid medication, it doesn't even show up on their blood test. It's like they're not taking the medication at all. It just completely prevents the absorption of that medication. And that's because it has these anti-nutrients, things like phytic acid, oxalates, tannins, lectins, saponins, and so on, that will disrupt your natural ability to digest nutrients, either by binding to those nutrients and blocking them out from absorption, denaturing them so we can't process them, blocking our own enzymes like protease inhibitors and saponins will block the enzymes and prevent them from breaking down the food so that we can absorb it. Being a physical barrier, like fiber. Fiber is actually an anti-nutrient and it can act as a physical barrier and prevent enzymes from getting to the food and then that broken down food from getting to the lumen of the intestine. It also binds to bile, which is necessary to break down, digest, and absorb fat. And so if you're binding the bile with your fiber, you're going to have less bile available to break down and absorb fat, and you're going to have less essential fats, and you're going to have a less essential fat soluble vitamins like vitamin D3, K2, vitamin A, retinol, vitamin E, and so on. So all of these things have an effect. And so at the very least, even if it's not all that toxic, a lot of these plants will have fiber, and fiber is an anti-nutrient. It can block up to 30% of nutrient absorption, and it can cause deficiencies in fat-soluble vitamins. It can lower your taurine because we make taurine in our liver, and that's expressed in our bile, and we don't absorb it until that bile is then reabsorbed. And if fiber is binding to that bile, it actually strips out the bile and the taurine with it. So you can become taurine deficient if you're eating a plant-based diet high in fiber because taurine only comes from meat. And it's not considered an essential nutrient or essential amino acid because we make it, but you have to actually absorb it once you've made it in your bile. And if you're stripping out your bile, it's not going to happen. So even from that sort of, I think that's actually a much bigger problem than people maybe realize that how much of these compounds block out our absorption. There are studies showing that black beans, for example, block out 75% of zinc absorption, and that corn can block out up to 100% of zinc absorption. And if it's blocking out zinc, it's blocking out other things too. That's not just the only thing it's doing. So blocking out 75 to 100% of the nutrients and these essential minerals and vitamins and so on, that's a very significant amount. And so this is just some black beans eaten together in conjunction with oysters, and it blocked out all the zinc that were in oysters, and oysters are the best form of bioavailable form of zinc. So the idea of you should eat a mixed plate with all the different colors of the rainbow and all these sorts of things because you'll get more nutrients that way. It's actually the reverse. You actually get less nutrients because you're getting more anti-nutrients that are blocking these things out. So you're actually doing yourself harm with that as well. And again, some of these things are toxic. I mean, our ancestors knew this. This is why we ferment things. This is why we cook them. This is why we soak them in lye and ash and clay, mix it with clay and other sort of materials to lower that toxic load and increase the bioavailability of the nutrients. And we forgot that, and we said, no. Actually, we're actually all bunny rabbits, and we need to just eat raw vegan diet and all that sort of stuff. And no, don't cook it. That gets rid of all the nutrients. I'm like, all right. It does actually help get rid of the toxins as well. There's nutrition books from 100 years ago from a lady named Adele Davis, who was way ahead of her time. Very interesting, what she knew back. It's always interesting to read these things to see how people looked at the world and what they understood at the time. And some of these people are absolutely brilliant, and we can learn a lot from them. And a lot of these things we've forgotten. And she's one of them. And so there was a passage that I found, just randomly came across it, and she said that you never eat raw spinach. You never eat because of the oxalates. And so what you do is you poach them in milk or some sort of milk derivative because the calcium in milk binds to the oxalates and neutralizes it so that you can eat it more safely. So it neutralizes those toxins. So they've understood about oxalates for hundreds of years, and they knew how to deal with them. And this is why you look at the traditional ways of preparing spinach. It's never raw spinach. It's a raw spinach. Now that's a very new sort of dish. Previously, it was creamed spinach and things like spanakopita, which is spinach cooked with feta cheese. So it's always with a dairy, some sort of dairy component because of that, of the um, oxalates and calcium. And so that they do that interaction before you absorb it, and it strips out your calcium out of your own blood. So we forgot that. We pretended that plants are just the best thing ever, largely because we were coerced into thinking that because of people like the Seventh-day Adventist Church that pushed for plant-based nutrition to be taught. They founded the American Nutrition and Dietetics Association. There's a lady named Lena Cooper who did that in the 1910s. She wrote the first textbook on nutrition taught in universities in 1925, and that was all plant-based ideology. They founded the processed food companies like Kellogg's and Sanitarium and 20 others. Sanitarium is the largest cereal producer in Australia, for example. They're very influential. They're the main sponsors, or one of the main sponsors, of the Australian Dietetics Association. When my friend Dr. Gary Fettke, who's an orthopedic surgeon, was started to use ketogenic diets to help his diabetic patients so that he didn't have to amputate their legs, and it worked. He came under fire, and the head of the American Dietetics, or sorry, the Australian Dietetics Association, personally called the head of his hospital and said, "You need to shut this guy up," and you shut him down. And they got one of their nutritionists to put in a complaint against him at the hospital, and they had this whole legal battle where they tried to take his license away, but he eventually won. And now ketogenic diets are in the national guidelines for treating diabetes. So he was vindicated on that, which is great. Um, because he was right, and he was helping people, and he was actually making it so they didn't have to get their legs and feet amputated, or had to have a much uh, more reduced amount of amputation. I mean, this is what being a doctor is about. It's actually helping people, actually doing the right thing for them, not just blindly following the guidelines or following procedure because that's what you're told to do and you're getting paid for it, and doing the procedures that make you more money. No, you do the right thing for your patient. That's what you do. And so he's one of the last few real doctors left, really. And they actually, an organization here of doctors in Australia actually sued for the minutes of one of the cereal companies. And they actually said that, this damn ketogenic diet movement is killing our cereal sales. So we need to shut these people down. And so we need to discredit these doctors and influencers that are pushing this or promoting this, and especially the doctors. We need to discredit them. We need to get their licenses taken away to discredit them. This is why you see like the vegan pushers, or just the mainstream cereal and statin pushers saying that, oh, these carnivore and keto people, they're just disgraced doctors. They just all lost their life. No, they didn't. They tried. Yeah, you definitely tried, but that was a tactic, and it didn't work. You look at the plant-based guys like Dr. Greger. That guy's never even practiced medicine. He's not a practicing physician. But they're happy to listen to him. But then they talk about Gary Fettke. Oh, no, he's disgraced. Well, no, he's not. He has his license. He didn't lose his license, and neither did other people like Dr. Baker. Like Dr. Baker that did not lose his license for promoting a ketogenic diet or anything like that. He got pushed out of his practice because he was actually helping people without surgery and helping them to avoid surgery, and that was costing the hospital money. So they're like, "Oh, get this guy out of here." So that's pretty evil. But they reviewed his license because how they did it was they attacked his license like they did with Dr. Fettke, and he defended it and he won. They never actually suspended his license or revoked his license. They just put it on hold while they investigated, and they investigated and said, "Yeah, you did nothing wrong. There's no issues." And so it's things like that. So they try to do that, and so the cereal companies said we need to start discrediting these doctors that promote this and get their licenses taken away, so we can say, oh, it's just a discredited doctor lost his license. Now he's just trying to make money being, scamming online or something nonsensical like that. And they named Gary Fettke by name, right? And so they are, the top sponsors and funders of the Australian Dietetics Association. They wanted to discredit and get these people's licenses taken away. They named Dr. Fettke by name, and then for some reason, the head of the Australian Dietetics Association personally calls the head of his hospital and says, "We need to get this guy kicked out. We need to get this guy shut down." Right. So it's very nefarious. And yeah. So, but at the same time, uh, they're wrong. I mean, we've got facts on our side. They try to take people's license away, like Dr. Fettke. I've had plenty of people try to attack my license and say that I'm spreading misinformation and things like that, but I'm not. And so I haven't actually had any penalties or anything like that. And I've never had a complaint, like an official complaint from like another doctor or a patient or anything like that. It's just people not even necessarily in the country that try to attack my license because of they don't like the things that I'm saying online. So it's sort of a pattern, but it's at a certain point it becomes very obvious, and then people see like, okay, yeah, well, look, there's just just angry people out there that are trying to cause mischief, and we're not going to pay attention to it anymore.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful for doctors like yourself, Dr. Gary Fettke, Dr. Noakes, all these people that have stood up against some
Hmm.
of that opposition and
Yeah.
just made such an impact. It's funny, you mentioned the spinach and how we've known about, oxalates for hundreds of years. I asked my grandparents once, my grandpa's 94, 95, my grandma's in her,
Mhm.
early or late 80s. And I asked them if they grew up eating spinach, and they answered yes. And I was a little bit surprised. But then they said we could only find it a few weeks out of the year, and whenever we would
Mhm.
eat it, it was always creamed and always served with a cream sauce. Like it was
Yeah.
always cooked, and it always came with something with calcium, and it was absolutely seasonal. You couldn't get it in
Yeah.
January if you wanted it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's important as well. It's like these things. If people did eat crops, it was generally seasonal. Now, you could preserve things and at certain times and in certain ways. I mean, pies. That was a way of preserving apples. You could make like an apple pie and things like that. My grandfather talks about that. He grew up on a farm, and they'd make a whole bunch of pies when the apples would come in, and then they'd store them away like in the attic, and they would all freeze, and so they could take it was just because freaking freezing like in the Midwest. And I think they were in Wisconsin, but I don't yeah, maybe I don't remember exactly where they were at the time, but I think it was Wisconsin. But hey, bloody cold in the winters anyway in that sort of region. And that's just sort of a way of preserving these things over the winter. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this wasn't something that you just had every single day. We were, if this was a natural way of eating, this would be something that you could do in your area. You wouldn't have to fly fruit in from Costa Rica or Central California or Florida. You would be able to just get everything you needed around you because we did not have airplanes 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, as shocking as that may sound. We've only had the technology to reliably sail across oceans like the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, within the last few hundred years, right? The voyage of Magellan and Columbus and all these people. These are massive voyages. I mean, even Marco Polo. I mean, you could at least follow the land. Got in trouble, you could just go in and find a port. Go in open seas where you just got nothing around you. I mean, we didn't have that technology until then, basically, and then it was a bit of a stretch. We had to sort of build to do that. So you just couldn't transfer things across the world, across the globe easily like that and store it and freeze it and do all these other sorts of things. So, it doesn't make sense that we would have had 5 pieces of fruit a day. and 5 servings of vegetables and 12 servings of grains and all these other sorts of things. Grains, you can sort of keep, but um, a lot of these other things, I mean, they just spoil. They go bad, and like you can't keep them. I mean, you make jams and preserves and things like that, and that's how you could have things. That's again how you store these things. But you would not have as much access to these. You would not be able to eat 5 pieces of fruit a day. You would not be able to eat tons of vegetables all day. You're in northern Scandinavia, you know, uh, lettuce doesn't exist in the middle of winter in northern Scandinavia. So it's like, how are you expecting people to eat that? And how are you trying to say that that's a natural thing for them to eat?
Yeah, no, that's very well said. We're in the middle of winter here in the northern hemisphere as we're recording this. You're in the southern hemisphere. What you're talking about is like in the winter, things are not available. I would also say that where you are in the middle of summer, if I turned you loose and said, eat all you want, don't go to grocery stores or restaurants, but just live off the land, you would probably in the middle of summer find almost nothing that you could eat. Like
Mhm.
it's striking.
Kangaroos, maybe.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's so
no,
interesting.
yeah, well, and that's the thing too. I mean, you say, well, there's fruit and plants want you to eat fruit. Well, plants don't necessarily want you to eat the fruit. They want something to eat the fruit. It's not necessarily you. Most fruiting plants, most fruit will still kill you. And because they're co-evolved with animals like birds generally that are designed to eat them, and quite often those seeds won't germinate unless they go through the guts of specific birds, like the cassowary bird here in Australia. They just eat tropical fruits and about 150 varieties of tropical fruit. And every single one of those fruits will kill you. And every single one of those fruits will kill almost every other animal on Earth, except the cassowary bird, because it won't germinate unless it goes through the gut of the cassowary bird. And so it has to be very beneficial to a cassowary bird and very toxic and harmful to anything else, or else those plants die out. If those cassowary birds even leave the area, those plants die out. So you can walk around, you can be in the tropics and think, I mean, because I'm in a more arid area of Australia, it's like, yeah, you're not finding too much forage around here. Little bits of things, but I mean, you're not going to get an adequate amount of nutrition, just living off like little, twigs and leaves and things like that. Like you're going to have to make a kill, and you're going to have to get an animal. Even in the more tropical regions of Australia, unless you come across like an orchard, there's not that many of edible plants and edible fruit out there. Certainly in comparison to the rest of the fruits out there. So if you're just finding random pieces of fruit, you would be very foolish to eat them because most of them will make you very sick or even kill you. So it's um, it's a lot more stark than people realize. All you have to do is watch those shows like Naked and Afraid, and what was that one? It's like Alone or something like that. We're just out in the middle of nowhere. And the people that survive, they always talk about, I have to get the fattiest food. I have to get the fattiest meat. This is so important. And animals are breaking in. They're trying to get the fat, and they get their stores taken away, and they're in trouble, and they don't survive. And then even the ones that are able to get a lot of fatty meat and all these sorts of things, I mean, they're just losing tons of weight because it's so difficult for them to get enough food and enough nutrition out there. And these are survivalists. These are people that do this stuff, all the time. And but it's rough. It's a rough survival. And there's never been a vegan winning that. There's no plant-based people that can even compete on that. It's not possible. And they're living in the middle of the woods. Plenty of plants. I mean, go for it. It's not going to happen. They're not able to. You can't survive on that. So we live in a very, very coddled existence where where the most of the rest of the world does not live in these conditions that we have. We have the luxury of pretending that we're herbivores. We have the luxury of pretending that we're vegans and things like that, and or going vegan because we do have an abundance, and we do have vitamin shops and things like that, where you can get all the supplements of all the things that you're missing. That's not the case in Central Africa. That's not the case in most of India. That's not the case in most of the world that is well below the poverty line. And so it is a privilege to be able to enact this fantasy that we can survive on plants, and we should try to survive on plants.
Yeah. One of my favorite episodes I've ever heard of yours that you did was on Dr. Paul Saladino's show, where the two of
Mhm.
you kind of did a bit of a debate. Not so much of a debate. I really enjoyed that. It was very respectful,
More of
and
a
you guys had a
discussion.
good
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I really liked it. And he made the point that a strict carnivore diet for him gave him all these issues. We hear about electrolyte issues he was complaining about, and he was trying to justify eating not only fruit but fruit juice. And in particular, I
Mhm.
remember this always stood out to me, like watermelon, like something magical about watermelon
Mhm.
juice, which I thought
Mhm.
watermelon was like 99% water anyway. So
Mhm.
is there any justification in your mind for including things like lots of fruit juices, honey, that type of thing?
Well, I don't think you need it anyway. And I mean, I'm living proof of that. So are you, and so are the Inuit, and so on. I mean, even mainstream sources such as the Institutes of Medicine and the National Academies of Science have put out uh, public public statements saying that the amount of total carbohydrates that you need in your diet throughout the entirety of your life is zero, as long as you're getting a sufficient amount of proteins and fats, and that there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. You do not need to ingest any carbohydrates whatsoever. You make everything that you need, and more than that, there are entire civilizations that have gone their entire life either with huge gaps in carbohydrate consumption or never eating carbohydrates in their entire existence. So we know you don't need them. And for example, the idea that if you don't get enough carbohydrates, your thyroid, won't function properly. But the studies on this that look long term, and some of the studies that get brought up are more short term, and they're in 18 diseased, overweight, diabetic men, and there's like some little transient drop, and it only goes for a month, and it's like, okay, so it's not generalizable, it's not to the general public, and it's very short term, it's only 1 month. What happens later, right? Well, when you look at long-term studies going on 2 years or longer, they actually show absolutely no changes or detrimental changes or drops in the thyroid, no elevation of cortisol, etc. The idea that this is a stress state is simply untrue. It's not factual. Um, in fact, we treat hypercortisolism like Cushing's disease with ketogenic diets in mainstream medicine right now. That is in the literature, and people can look that up, that is already used if somebody has a hypercortisol state like Cushing's disease. You put them on ketogenic diets. That actually helps ameliorate the damage from high cortisol. So if ketogenic diets caused high cortisol, then obviously that would exacerbate that situation and make it a lot worse. And that would be a terrible idea to put your patient on a ketogenic diet if they had Cushing's. But that is exactly what they do. And that's exactly what we do in mainstream medicine. And you do that before treatment, during treatment, and then even after definitive treatment, like surgery to remove a tumor, like a pituitary tumor in Cushing's. So that that doesn't even pass the smell test, right? So you can eat it if you want to. Um, There are people that do. But well, I know that there's nothing that you're missing that you would get from fruit. I mean, I think the main reason that Dr. Saladino um, likes to do carbohydrates was specifically for that he thought that long-term ketosis could cause problems, could cause hormonal problems, thyroid issues, possibly other hormone issues, elevated SHBG. But it's first of all SHBG. We just know so little about what affects that. And my SHBG was fairly low when I first got my bloods tested, sort of 2 years after I went carnivore, they've been exactly the same every time I've tested it. I mean, it
What
just
is? I've
hasn't
never heard of it.
changed.
What is it?
SHBG is steroid hormone binding globulin, and this binds to multiple hormones, not just testosterone, and it keeps it sort of in a storage form, in an inactive form, and then what's left over is your free hormones, like your free testosterone. So when you check your testosterone levels, you would want to test your testosterone, your SHBG, as well as your free testosterone or estimated free testosterone. They have to look at other sorts of albumin is another thing that can bind these things. So there's different binding globulins, and they would estimate, okay, how much of this testosterone is bound up according to these binding globulins, how much is free and left over. So that's the active form is the free form. And so you can have very high total testosterone, but if the free testosterone is lower, then that's less of an effect. But I simply just don't see that, and I've never seen studies in literature showing that. Again, the 2 year plus studies on ketogenic diets, they don't show any sort of hormonal disruption, and they don't show any sort of problems. And I've never seen that in my patients. I mean, I just saw a patient just the other day, um, and he's a big guy, and he works out a lot, and his SHBG is very low, like on the lowest end of the reference range. He's been carnivore for years. I've been carnivore for years. My SHBG hasn't changed a tick. So I just don't see these manifestations. When they say that your thyroid is going to get damaged, um, when? Because my thyroid again is exactly the same as it was 8 years ago. When I came onto this, or 8+ years ago, and my patients, when I put them on carnivore diets, their thyroid levels improve actually, because they're stopping plants, and they're stopping plants, and these plants, there's a whole category of plant toxins called goitrogens that cause goiters, which are enlarged dysfunctional thyroids. And so those goitrogens can disrupt thyroid production in a number of different ways. Many of them block iodine uptake in the thyroid. And so, especially in places like Australia, where the iodine levels are extremely low in the soil, and there's a whole place in America called the goiter belt, where there's like very low iodine in the soil. So people started getting all these goiters and thyroid dysfunction. That's why they started putting iodine in the salt. They started iodizing salt. Um, but there were native populations alive on that area of land for millennia, that have at least no reports of any thyroid dysfunction, but they were largely meat based, and so they weren't agrarian like the European settlers and the early Americans, who were eating a whole bunch of plants that had goitrogens, leafy greens, kale, broccoli, these sorts of things, full of goitrogens. In fact, almonds have cyanide. Cyanide blocks iodine uptake in the thyroid. So things like flaxseed are very, very rich in cyanide, even more so than almonds, and they'll block this stuff out as well. So they get rid of all that, and so now they're not blocking any of that iodine, and they can actually get that iodine into their thyroids. But also, you're not having all the anti-nutrients that block out the iodine uptake in the first place. You don't have the anti-nutrients that are blocking out the zinc and the selenium that are required for conversion of T4 into T3. And people like to say, well, on ketogenic diets, your T3 goes down. Well, it might, but the fact of the matter is that ketogenic diets are not carnivore diets. Ketogenic diets still have a lot of leafy greens and all that sort of stuff. And he goes, oh, you have to eat a whole bunch of greens. Well, okay, they're your goitrogens. And anti-nutrients that can stuff up function. But again, the 2 year plus studies show, yeah, no, that actually doesn't happen. Thyroid function is actually perfect. Also, you don't need as much thyroid hormone to produce the same amount of ATP with fat versus glucose, because glucose provides about 30 to 32 ATP units, whereas fat can provide up to 140 ATP. for the same amount of T3 that you need, right? So you're getting about 3 times or more of ATP energy by just running on fat from for the same unit of same amount of units of T3. So you just don't need as much, right? But I see this all the time. My T3 is in the high end of the range. It's in the optimal range. Um, I look at reference ranges that are based on optimal reference ranges for optimal health, and that's where my T3 has always been, and that's where my long-term carnivore patients typically get to. But I often see massive improvements in their thyroid. The number one cause of hypothyroidism now is Hashimoto's. It used to be malnutrition, goitrogens, and lack of iodine, etc. Now it's Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition that damages the thyroid. Carnivore diets fix autoimmune issues. It cuts out the underlying root cause, I believe, of the damage of autoimmune conditions, things like lectins and other plant toxins that are actually damaging your body. And your body's making a perfectly appropriate response to that damage, and your body's getting hit in the crossfire. So, even immunologists, top immunologists since the 1980s and 90s, like Dr. Fried, have published on this in the 80s and 90s about how the body actually can't attack itself. This is a nonsense, and this has never been satisfied or shown to be happening. It's just they're just saying, oh well, there's damage happening here. It must be that that the immune system went haywire. But that doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. If people want to look at that, I did a whole lecture on called "Rethinking Autoimmunity" or Autoimmune Diseases on YouTube, and but they were theorizing this was actually coming from lectins back in the 90s. Dr. Fried said this in a paper that he published in a peer-reviewed paper. We were treating autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's in the 1800s with a pure beef and water diet with Dr. Salisbury and others that came after him. So when you put someone with Hashimoto's on a carnivore diet, it helps the Hashimoto's. And so it again can improve thyroid function. So I don't actually see thyroid function going down. I see thyroid function improving. And I see that across the board. I've never seen anybody's thyroid function go down. I've never seen anybody's testosterone levels plummet or SHBG just go crazy. I've never seen that when someone goes on a carnivore diet. So I think the concerns that people like Dr. Salisbury have, I'm just not seeing them either in the literature or in practice. And I've had thousands of patients that I've treated with a carnivore diet over the last decade, and I'm simply not seeing any of this stuff. And that aligns with the literature as well, that there are no long-term harms from a ketogenic approach. So I don't think you need to have fruit or honey. I did a video called "Fruit and Honey Are Not Carnivore," and I sort of discussed that. But at the same time, that's why. And so Dr. Saladino really understands the whole idea about plant toxins. And so what he was looking for was like, okay, ketogenic, he doesn't want to be ketogenic, so he wants to look for some source of carbohydrates. So what are some clean versions of carbohydrates? Okay, well, raw milk. Okay, fine. Well, what about fruit juices? Okay, well, that's going to be less toxic. He lives in Costa Rica. He's getting, ripe fruit, much larger growing period throughout the year. That's a luxury that not everybody has. And then honey, things like that. So, that's sort of his choice of less harmful carbohydrates. And if you were going to do that, I would agree with that. That's probably the way to do it. But I'd probably just still stick with raw milk if someone were to do that. But the fact of the matter is, just the carbohydrates themselves cause harm. I mean, these cause glycation, they cause damage to your body. The glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules in your body and cause damage. They damage your arteries. This is why they can precipitate cardiovascular disease. They damage the blood supply to your organs and tissues. So this is why diabetes, high blood sugar is the number one cause of kidney failure. It's the number one cause of adult onset blindness. It's the number one cause of getting your legs amputated because of that glucose damage. So that's not something that I want in my body or in my patient's body. Fructose, which is the sweet part of sugar, it's 50% of the carbohydrate sugars that are in fruit. And they are 6 to 7 times more glycating than glucose is, because all carbohydrates cause glycation, cause that damage. And so, that can be even more harmful, but it goes beyond that, right? Because there are two other major factors as well that people don't necessarily know about. As far back as 1974, there's studies actually looking at giving people carbohydrates of various forms, and even giving fruit or sugar in this form or that form or other sorts of things. They even give them fruit juice, but they gave them 100 grams of carbs, and then they tested their blood work at 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. And they were specifically looking at neutrophil function, which is our first line cellular defense against bacteria, cancers, and is required for wound healing, tissue repair if you get like a cut or something like that. And they found that from basically any source that you get the sugar from, that it shut down the neutrophil's ability to function, specifically the phagocytose bacteria. So they couldn't swallow them up and eat those bacteria. And so if they can't do that, that's their major function, is eating dead cells, eating bacteria, doing these sorts of things. So cancer cells, all that sort of stuff. So they weren't able to do that for up to 5 hours after they consumed just 100 grams of carbs, right? And even after like 5 hours, they were still only like 50% function. And we're eating carbohydrates 3 times a day, and we're being told to eat carbohydrates 3 times a day every day, and then three snacks in between, right? So there isn't a second in that day that your neutrophils are actually functioning properly. Like, you might get a couple hours before you wake up every morning where your neutrophils actually worked properly. But other than that, you're screwed. And so this is one of the reasons why people, when they go carnivore, they have massive improvements in their immune system. They just hardly ever get sick. Have great wound healing, recoveries from surgeries, etc. I mean, obviously, also you're eating more protein and things like that, which has already been shown in clinical trials to improve surgical outcomes and wound healing. And the other part of the immune system would be your viral immune system, or one of the other parts of your immune system. And that gets affected as well, because your oral biome, the bacteria in your mouth, change dramatically depending on what you eat. And when you eat carbohydrates, it breeds for bacteria that actually rot your teeth, make these acidic sort of byproducts that sort of melt the enamel, which just tells you right there we're not designed to eat carbohydrates, because no animal in the wild eats a natural diet that rots their teeth, because you lose your teeth, you lose the ability to eat, and you die. And so no natural diet will rot the teeth of an animal. So if you're eating something that's rotting your teeth, that something is not designed for you or your species. That's really all the proof you need that we're not designed to eat carbohydrates, but there's more. But another bacteria or other bacteria that cause gum disease, gingivitis, like Porphyromonas gingivalis, that's a major cause of gum disease, which again, most carnivores talk about how their gum disease goes away in a couple of weeks after they go carnivore. And that is very significant, because almost no one can get rid of gum disease. It's very, very, very common. Dentists are now. I saw a news article about this, or it was on the news. They were talking about how just dental health is just so wretched now that what they're having to do is they're having to paint children's teeth with iodine just to like try to disinfect and kill these bacteria that are just destroying their teeth and their gums. And it's just like, can you guys not see that this is going in the wrong direction? Right? I mean, we did not have to do this 20 years ago. We did not have to do this 100 years ago. And we didn't need dentists 200 years ago. So, it's the Porphyromonas gingivalis can only live in your mouth. Really, it's really can only survive there if you're eating carbohydrates, not because it eats carbs itself, but because it can't really grow without candida, because it's a anaerobic bacteria, Porphyromonas. So it means it doesn't want oxygen there. So it wants to be in an oxygen-free environment. And Candida uses a lot of oxygen. So they actually have sort of a relative low oxygen state that they can be in, and they can sort of grow in this dual biofilm with Candida. Candida has to have carbohydrates. It doesn't do well without carbohydrates, so it needs to eat them. And so if you're not eating carbohydrates, you can't have Candida and you can't get Porphyromonas. If you have Porphyromonas, every time you brush your teeth or floss your teeth, even worse, you are introducing those bacteria into your mouth. And I was taught this in year one in medical school. Every time you brush your teeth, you're getting a transient bacteremia, meaning that those bacteria are going all throughout your body, and then your body's immune system sort of clears it out. Well, fun fact, you're eating carbohydrates, your bacterial defense, like your neutrophils, aren't functioning and can't kill those things. And they're running around causing damage. Porphyromonas is known to cause damage to your arteries, like heart disease. It gets into your brain. 89% of glioblastoma brain tumors sampled showed that they had Porphyromonas in the tumors themselves, and that Alzheimer's people that died of Alzheimer's actually found they had similar amounts of Porphyromonas in their brains when they died as well. And the Porphyromonas itself shuts down your viral immune system, which then causes all sorts of chronic viral issues and getting sick and all these other sorts of things. So it's I mean, there are so many facets to this that it's just incredible. And but all roads lead to Rome. Like all this evidence just leads back to the fact that we're carnivores. We're not designed to eat this other stuff, and it causes harm. And when you just get rid of it, your body starts working better. You just pull the anchor off your back on your immune system. You just stop damaging your immune system, and all of a sudden, your immune system works better, and you get protected against cancer and infectious disease. And you can't tell me that's not a net positive on the health of the organism. You just can't.
Yeah. Man, I love that. I notice so many people out there that want to try to follow a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet, and they get so confused by conflicting information. And you're just the best at explaining things and setting things straight. I learn something every time I get a chat with you, and I know it's where you are, so I want to respect your time and make sure you have a good bedtime. Dr. Chaffee, thank you so very much for this conversation and educating us today. Really, really appreciate any time we get to chat with you. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work and find your podcast as well?
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, my website is just dranthonychaffee.com. So dranthonychaffee.com. So Chaffee spelled CHAFF as in Frank, double E as in Edward. You can find pretty much everything on there. There's a lot of resources, studies, etc., that are on my website that people can look at. I have a YouTube channel, again, just Anthony Chaffee MD, Instagram Anthony Chaffee MD, and Twitter is just Anthony_Chaffee, things like that. But you can find all that stuff through my website anyway, and see what you want. I do a carnivore challenge and things like that for people that need a little extra help. But that's on Mighty Networks, and that, again, can be found through my website. But again, I make I have hundreds of videos available online, and my podcast is a Plant-Free MD podcast. People can go, and this is like all the information's there for people to take a look at if they want to do that and succeed. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel. I have playlists on getting started on carnivore diet. I have playlists on autoimmunity, on cancer, on cholesterol and cardiovascular disease, on athletics and muscle building, things like that. So there's a lot of resources there for people that are just completely free and available for people if they want to check it out.
That's amazing. We'll link to all of that up in the show notes. You are incredibly hardworking, along with your day job, which you still have to go and practice. You offer so many things that are amazing resources for people. Like you said, they're all free. So again, thank you so very much for all of your hard work. Thank you for sharing it with us today. We just really, really appreciate you.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.